Hello everybody and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Channel 0, The Butcher's Block, Episode 5, The Red Door. And it's kind of all starting to come together. Not as much as I would like, considering that we only have one episode left. It seems like there's still a lot of ground to cover for this story, but we are having things develop in a really interesting way. And maybe the most exciting thing for me is that we saw the inklings last episode that these two sisters were gonna switch, right? That Alice, who had been the good one, in our minds anyways, my mind as an audience member, I was thinking, okay, Alice is the protagonist. Like, she's trying to help her sister, she's a social worker, like, she's trying to do all the right things, and she's trying to avoid this villain, right? That the first 3 or 4 episodes had the schizophrenia monster just chasing Alice all over the place, and that really set her up as like the central figure in the series, and then they pull the rug out from under us. And Alice completely flips. And I've been a little bit unhappy over the last several episodes. I've mentioned in my recaps that I feel like Alice the decisions that she has made have been a little bit on rails, but here, the decision that she makes here to join the Peaches, this finally feels like something that character totally owns. Because her whole deal is this terror of schizophrenia. It manifests for us as the viewers as this weird monster thing that admittedly terrified me as well. And I think that was an excellent way of getting us on board with the fact that this is everything that she cannot become, that she does not want to become. And finally in this episode, she makes these decisions that are horrifying to us, but in another way completely understandable from her perspective. I totally got that. And the fact that Zoe has flipped the other way, that she has finally found something to grab onto and say, no, like, if I'm going to be crazy, so be it, but I'm not going to let that ruin my life. I'm not going to let that turn me into a monster. And that was an interesting flip too. And I have to admit, and I'm ashamed of this, you guys, I'm like super embarrassed, but it was only about halfway through episode 5 of the 6 episode arc that we're getting that I did realize that Alice and Zoe's names start with A and Z and opposite ends of the alphabet, and maybe like the most obvious drop that this show could have possibly done, and I just, right over my head. The show opens with Chief sort of visually a representation of him feeling remorse. He sees Officer Mouse, his son, with his throat cut, standing there in the kitchen. He's trying to prepare himself for what's coming. He knows what's coming. There's a knock on the door. The Peaches are here to collect, and of course we find out it's all in his mind. But rejoice, because Officer Luke Vanchik, Officer Mouse, is still around. He's still here. He's been rescued by the landlady. I mentioned last week that I have this weird sort of dueling landlord-landlady hypothesis going on, where maybe she's not everything she appears to be, and that's still kind of in there. She's definitely not working for the Peaches, or if she is, she's doing like the worst job of it. But there's something in there. She talks about the fight she had with her brother, and in my mind, all right, and this is like weirdo speculation, okay? I'm not saying that I think this is true or that this is definitely true or anything. This is just something that I think would be cool. If we have dueling landlord-landlady things, then maybe her brother is the deer god that we see later on in the show, the Wendigo. Maybe her story about how he disappeared in Butcher's Block is kind of like a fabrication of the truth, and that all of these fights that she's talking about are sort of disagreements about how to deal with the humans. Again, I don't think that there's like a ton of stuff to support that within the text of the show, But it was something that occurred to me as we were watching, and she is sewing up Officer Luke. Apparently, he got his throat cut, but it was not like, no arteries were hit, no veins, like he's not going to bleed out instantly, so she gets him home, she's got her taxidermy stuff. That's still creepy. That's another thing that makes me think, like, okay, the one god is focused on cannibalism, right? If she's like some other iteration of godness, right? Maybe she's like about the preservation of life beyond death, and that's why she can help Officer Luke. I don't know. He comes back now, and he don't have a voice. And that, like, I think for me that levels him up a little bit more. Like, he's definitely taken the turn. And to be fair, like, he had been turning this whole time. He had been making decisions to be a stronger person and a better person, but now Officer Luke is almost something else. I think he's still human. Like, I'm not saying he's been turned into some weird vampire thing, but he's like a different person now. And we find that out by how he interacts with his dad. Because his dad initially talks to the Peaches, says, listen, I know you've come for your brother. He dead, but I balanced the scales out, okay? I killed the person who killed it. We don't have to have a war here. Only problem is he's not dead, as we already discussed. Officer Mouse did, in fact, get rescued and is being sewn up as they speak. And he has to face the fact that not only did he kill his son for the quote-unquote greater good, but it didn't take. That's super, like, guilt carry right there, because if Officer Mouse had died, he could say to himself, well, it's okay. Like, I hate that I did it. Like, I feel super guilty, but I did reset the balance. But now, A, he's tried to kill his son, and he has to carry that with him. B, it didn't work, so his son knows that he tried to kill him. And C, it didn't work, so the balance he was trying to reset did not balance. That to me is a wonderful bit of, like, just fastball to the face for this guy. And it really explains why he turns later on in the episode. But before we get too far past what the show thinks are the main characters, we do need to talk about Alice and Zoe. We get a little bit of a flashback to when Zoe got her monster thing taken out and turned by the Peaches. She was covered in blood for some reason, which I don't know why. I don't fully understand what the symbolism there was, but I mean, maybe that wasn't symbolism, but like when they do it to Alice, like it's all sort of clean and she gets dipped in blood, but they're clearly in like an operating theater. It doesn't get all over her face. When Zoe's covered in blood, I don't know whose blood that is. I don't know where they got the blood. I don't know what the purpose the blood serves exactly, other than to be creepy. But it raises a lot of questions to me because it looks like Joseph Peach just like right there on the bus bench just said, all right, well, let's yank that thing out, and sort of turned her that way. And I don't know what that means or if it means anything. But Zoe's starting to realize that things are not right. And Alice is not worried. Now, there's a certain aspect of this that's recognizable from when Zoe got turned. And Zoe does understand this. She's seen what it's like for Alice, for when you know, she's been through this. She's been turned. She's had this sort of giddy, I don't care, nothing in the world matters except for how good I feel right now kind of attitude. And Alice is going through that, but Zoe's on the other side and she's trying to pull Alice through and say, hey, things are bad. I overheard these Peaches talking. They're going to try to get this girl and do something with it. They're talking about some kind of deadline. We need to go. We need to get Izzy and get out of here. And Alice is not ready. And the analogy that Zoe uses to Alice, because Alice tells her, listen, I'm so terrified of this craziness that literally anything is preferable. Like, the eating of human flesh does not even rank okay, compared to how I feel about going crazy and being a schizophrenic. And Zoe has a great word for her here where she says, listen, that's nuts. Like, that's, I'm trying to paraphrase here. She said, it's like being so afraid of disfigurement that you let someone cut your face off. And on the one hand, that sounds like the least logical thing you could possibly do to avoid disfigurement. On the other hand, I can understand where from Alice's side, she's just like, if your face is gone, at least you're not afraid anymore. Like, you know, you're there, you've jumped in, that's it. And she goes through with it. She gets the operation. She has her centipede thing removed that we saw Zoe get hers removed in like a weird church area too, by the way. I like the set that they put together here for them to do this operation in. It's a combination religious ritual and medical procedure. I don't think I've ever seen quite that kind of balance before, where it does seem very clean and very sort of preset, but also there's candles and like curtains and choir singing and things. That was neat. And Zoe realizes that Alice is essentially not coming back. So she decides to go and investigate. And I think, I might have my timelines wrong, but I think earlier in the episode, she goes and she checks out this red door. And the red door is not okay. All right, she sees flashes of this dear God thing. And now that she knows that Alice is kind of gone, she starts worrying about Izzy a little bit more. And she starts asking about Izzy. And Alice finds Izzy in the walls. A great, I don't know what this is. Like, Izzy is clearly become part of this world now. She's in a wall. Like, she literally pops out through a wall to Alice. Like, the wall is giving birth to this little girl. And Alice says, oh, it's cool. Like, I'll help you out. I won't tell them. And then immediately runs to Joseph Peach, which that's interesting. But I do want to focus on the fact that somehow Izzy has learned her way around here. I don't know what that means. I don't know what we're talking about when she's able to be inside the walls of the house. But that's something. It feels like something. And she's got all this, they said they've marked her, and she's got all this white stuff all over her. I assume that that's part of the process. But I feel like that there's not necessarily things that like got cut from the show, but there's obviously some pieces to the puzzle that we don't have yet as to why she's like this and how she's here and what she means to these people other than just a sacrifice. Alice gives up Izzy to Joseph Peach, as I mentioned earlier, and they put her in the red door. But Zoe, on the case, ready not to be taken in, she has been stumbling around and she meets the riddle maker. And she asks him about she makes a riddle for, I'm not a peach and I'm not a fly, but I, go through the red door anyway, what am I? And he says, oh, you're a child. And she realizes what has happened, what is going to happen. And she goes and she gets Izzy and she says, we getting out of here. We are leaving. And she, in one of the best bits of this episode, I think, she goes and she grabs the centipede that they took out of Alice and in front of her sister eats it. Somebody, I was reading the sort of post-episode discussion of this episode in the subreddit, and somebody pointed out, and I think very astutely, that this is not a show about mental illness exactly. Like, it doesn't have some point to make about, having issues in your head of whatever kind. It's a show about the fear of that. It's about how, not being able to accept mental illness and being able to sort of integrate it is ultimately as damaging as the illness itself. And Alice spent so much time just being afraid that she was going to be schizophrenic. I think it's interesting. I mean, Zoe has meds that she can take. Zoe could be more normal in a much less horrifying way. And I think going over to the other side and seeing actual cannibalism makes her realize, oh wait, no, you know what? Those pills make me feel a little off sometimes, but I'm good. I'm just gonna go feel a little off, you guys. Bye, hand plants. But Alice has let this thing that is admittedly like having schizophrenia, I would imagine would be a super bummer. But she's made it bigger than it is. She's made it into such a huge thing in her life, such a terrible fear, and understandably so, that she's outweighed all of the other possibilities, that it has become the most horrifying thing that could happen when it's clearly not. Much worse things could happen to people than having a mental illness. I'm not trying to downplay mental illness, but there's a balance there, and Alice has gone off the wrong end. And I love that Zoe gets in there, saves Izzy, and sees the deer god, all right, which some of you have mentioned in the past, and now that we get a good look at him, these theories were borne out, that this thing is almost certainly inspired by the Wendigo, all right? The Wendigo is a sort of Inuit Native American myth that was created to, well, I say it was created, this is my theory. People lived in places where there was not a lot of food, like for long periods of time. And when they lived in periods where there was not very much food, the idea of eating another human became much more appealing. Maybe not like killing and eating, but maybe, your grandpa died and he's laying there on the ground and you think, I have not eaten anything in 3 weeks. He's dead. Surely I can, this is fine, right? I'll just a little nibble. And so in these cultures where there's a actual strong reason, like a pull towards cannibalism, there's this god thing. I know I take that back. It's not a god, although in this instance it kind of is. But it's a curse that if you eat the flesh of another human being, you turn into a monster that has the horns of a deer and it's kind of all messed up and misshapen. And if I'm remembering, my legend can jump really, really far, like horrifically far. So they in my mind, there's these ideas that are created to keep people human. It's this fear that these people had to conjure up to be able to keep themselves from eating human flesh. But here, it's the personification of whatever this god is that the peaches pray to. And Izzy runs away from it. Zoe helps. I keep saying Izzy and the way that their names sound is kind of reversey. I just now, as we're recording, I noticed that. And that's, I don't know if that means, but Zoe, Izzy, they're a little bit, maybe I'm just grasping at straws here, but it feels like that could mean something. But they run off. Joseph Peach, of course, tries to, appease the deer god, and it eats one of the little creepy baby dudes that has been helping them out. We still don't know where those guys are coming from, and we haven't seen the hooded one in a while either. The first one that we saw that super creeped me out in the first episode. I don't know where he went, but the deer god's clearly not okay. He's not happy. In the meantime, the Vancheks and the landlady have teamed up to take out the peaches. Chief Vanchek shot the Baldy Peach, all right, and his two little weirdo kids. Now, they get together. They're like, he ain't gonna be dead for very long. We got to chop the head off. Vampire rules or whatever. So they chop the heads off, and Chief Peach. I'm sorry. Yeah, I should say Chief Peach because he's gone over to their side. His argument is, okay, things are bad. We screwed up. We killed 2 of these things, but the rest are going to be coming, and they've got something worse. The deal that I made is clearly falling apart. We need to leave. And Officer Luke, Officer Mouse, the one who does not understand the world, quote unquote, says in his very silent way now, says, no, we're not, we have to help people. Like, there's a whole town that they're eating. We need to do something. And his dad responds with another one of these speechified stories about how, when Officer Luke was a kid and how dumb he was that he wanted to help the starving kids in Africa because his babysitter told him that if he didn't eat his food that there were other kids that wanted it, and he tried to mail it off. And like, it's so interesting to me that the contrast here is Chief Vanchek gives that story as like a slam at Luke. His whole thing there is, how stupid is it to think that you can help people? Like, for real, you're not going to help everybody. Might as well be every man for himself. I'm going to help you because you're my son and I care about you, which is like exactly opposite of what he was doing last episode, where he's like, well, the greater good, I guess I'll kill my son. This dude does not have a comprehensive philosophy of life. He's just trying to live, honestly. And I think his son realizes that. It almost comes out of nowhere what happens next, but I feel like it might be a little bit compressed timeline-wise, but I think it's 100% natural response, especially because of what Luke has been through and the, like, dying, essentially, and the pain that he's in, and the fact that he doesn't have a voice anymore. Like, this guy's going through some stuff, and he hears his dad say, listen, you can't help people. That's crazy talk. And Luke realizes that there's so great a gap between him and his father that it cannot be mended, and that his father is the monster that he did not want to believe that he was, and he shoots him right, I think, in the head. I don't believe it's a flesh wound. It looked like you done killed the dude kind of wound. And I think that sort of gets into another big theme of this, especially this episode, and I think this series, is the fracturing of families. The idea that these families are, that they meant a lot to each other, that they had a strong bond, but at some point there was something that came along and tore them apart and made them see that there were bigger differences under the surface than they realized at first. And that's some powerful stuff. While we're on the Officer Luke angle, I did want to mention, they talk about the tunnels in the previously on. If you watch this on regular TV, the previously on segment reminds us that there are these bootleggers tunnels that the landlady has under her house. And then there's a sequence where they're going to be chased by the Peaches, right? Like this before they get together and the dad shows up and everything. So we're the Peaches are coming. We're looking for an escape route, and she's trying to get into the tunnels, and then that's just a fake out. I can't tell if it's a fake out for the whole show and there's no reason to have the tunnels, or if that's going to come up later. There's a lot of stuff that's going to have to come up later because, as I mentioned, Zoe and Izzy have escaped, sort of. No, I take that back. They didn't escape. Zoe sent Izzy out to her hiding place. She's trying to go back and get her sister. The deer god's on the rampage. Joseph Peach is trying to make a deal. There's still a lot of pieces in play. I mean, a lot of them. As much as I didn't want to see Officer Luke die, and I'm super happy with his arc right now, there's a lot that needs to be resolved. I don't know how much we're going to find out about where the Peaches come from, or what their deal is, or how long ago they, made this deal with this god creature, or if it's just going to be the resolution of kind of what happens with these families. And it's important to note too that the Peaches are a family as well. And they have sort of the same divisions running through them that these other families have. The two brothers sort of resenting each other, and the mother and the son, not having the same priorities, where he's not so worried about the sacrifice, and she's the mother. I'm talking about the sort of the matriarch of the family. I think she's Joseph Peach's mom. She could be his wife. I don't have a good read on that, but there's all these little splinters and cracks in all of these families, and that seems to be a through line that's running through this. I'm excited to see how it wraps up. I also wanted to point out, somebody in the comments mentioned the sort of obvious imagery last week, even called out in the title, is sort of an Alice in Wonderland-esque running through a weirdo other world as Alice goes into the weird peach land. But somebody pointed out that the eating of the fairy food is probably traceable back to the idea of, I think it's Persephone going into the underworld and eating the pomegranates, which is a really cool tie-in, if it's intentional, back to the previous season of Channel Zero, where the things that the people that the house made, the father thing especially, like they would make these memories and they were filled with pomegranate seeds, and there were pomegranate seeds imagery in there. And now we have sort of a pomegranate motif here, if you will. They were actually bringing that idea into the sort of larger idea of going into the other world and eating their food, and if you eat their food, you're doomed. And if we follow that motif, Alice is doomed. I don't see how she gets out of this. I know Zoe's going back for her, and that makes sense. I mean, Zoe's not just going to leave her sister behind, but I don't see how Alice makes it out of this okay. I think Zoe survives, probably, but I think Alice is done for. And we're going to have to see, obviously, next week. Tune in. I hope that you are enjoying the show as much as I am. As always, I hope you're enjoying these recaps. If you have comments, things that I missed, things that I got wrong, things that you wanted to share about just like spinning off thoughts of your own, I love seeing all of those in the comments. I appreciate everybody who's chimed in. You all have made me smarter by sharing your thoughts throughout the season, and sort of opened my eyes. Although I do want to blame Syfy a little bit for how dumb I am, because between 9 and 10 on a Wednesday night, Syfy, this is not my ideal time to watch a TV show. It's just what I'm saying. Like, I'm ready. I go to bed at 10. Like, you want me to watch this TV show and then just be like, all right, this is a scary TV show sometimes. I don't need this. I don't need you to scare me right before I go to bed at 10 o'clock. Like, let's move early. Let's go to 7 or something. Anyway, I'm just playing around a little bit. Although it does annoy me somewhat that all of their shows are so late and on a Wednesday night, which is not great for my schedule. But we will see you guys next week with another episode of the Human Knickers Recap. You guys are awesome. Take care. That's all I have to say.